You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 122. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We are so happy to have you here with us today. In this episode, we've invited Heidi from the Zero Waste Classroom to share strategies that she uses in her classroom to reduce the waste that's created in her classroom and also to teach her students how to live a more zero waste lifestyle. So excited to share this episode with you today. But first, we're excited to share this week's sponsor, which is EduCalm Classroom, our social emotional learning and mindfulness program that's created especially for the classroom. This social emotional learning and mindfulness program gives you 2 to 5 minute audio recordings to listen to with your students to help prepare everyone's brains and bodies for calm and focused learning. This program is completely no prep. We have done all the work for you to give you everything that you need to easily be able to integrate social emotional learning and mindfulness within your classroom without having to be the expert. You can just sign up, press play, and get started and learn alongside your students. If you are interested in learning more about the EduCalm Classroom program, which is completely bilingual in both English and French, go to educalm.com and you'll be able to find lots of information about the EduCalm Classroom program and how it can help you to create a calm and focused learning atmosphere. So again, check out the EduCalm Classroom program at educalm.com. That's spelled EduCalme. You can get started with our free trial, which gives you the first unit of the EduCalm Classroom program, along with free training on how to easily implement this in your classroom and all sorts of other useful resources that will help you to get started. When you sign up for the free trial, you'll get access to this forever. It never expires. And then if you want a ready-to-use audio and lesson to use in your classroom every day for the entire school year, then sign up for a membership to EduCalm Classroom, which gives you 12 months access to the full library of this full year program. All right, now let's get into this awesome interview with Heidi from Zero Waste Classroom. But before we get in, I just want to preface this by letting you know that this interview was recorded pre-COVID, and we were going to release it kind of just as COVID was starting, but instead we held on to this episode so that we could share episodes and resources more pertaining to the realities of COVID as it was getting started. Now that this is our new reality, we are wanting to release this episode because it's so great. We don't want to just let it sit in the archives forever, but listen to it with a kind of mindset of how can I adapt this to what my current realities are, or how can I learn from this and implement this maybe in the future if it isn't realistic to start right away. So keep that in mind. Either way, this episode is awesome and we're so excited for you to hear it. Hello there, Heidi. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
So can we jump right in? Can you tell our audience a little bit about you?
Yeah, so my name is Heidi Rose, and I have been teaching in Denver, Colorado for 9 years now. And I've been in first grade the whole time, so I've been really lucky to be able to be going really in depth into my grade level and have a lot of freedom in the school that I'm at.
That's wonderful. So we have you on the show because you talk on a lot of different subjects on your kind of teacher Instagram account that we love, but we'd really love to dive into your main topic that you share about, which is zero waste classroom. So can you tell us, what is the zero waste movement?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is such a big question. Yeah. And there are just so many definitions of it. And I think that's part of the beautiful thing about the zero waste movement is it's really open and has a lot of space for people to create their own definitions within it. So the way that I like to think about the zero waste movement is zero waste is a way for me to think about the resources and materials and things that I'm consuming and work towards doing that in a circular way, like the zero would imply. So rather than consuming things in a linear way where, they're taken from the ground and the earth and then used up for a certain amount of time and then discarded, and then it starts all over at the beginning of a line. The zero in zero waste is really there to remind us that we can have this goal of using things in a circle where from the beginning of their life, they are, circling around and not having to be discarded and used up. And of course, that is a really idealistic and high-reaching goal for where we have got ourselves as a society. So one thing that I have in my mind as I even describe myself as a zero waste person is that no one is really zero waste. There is no one who, no matter, what their life looks like on Instagram or, the amount of trash that they are collecting on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis, no one is making no trash or no waste. And that's because the system that we're living in has so much behind the scenes waste and trash. And what we're really aiming to do is just rethink our relationship to all of these materials and resources that we're using. So zero waste for me, that's kind of a long explanation, but zero waste for me is just the reminder that we're thinking differently about what we're consuming and using. And that can mean so many different things on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. So how did you get interested in the zero waste movement? What was it that sort of sparked that joy in you, that motivation to want to dive into this? It's a really big, as you said, it's even hard to describe the topic because it's such a big thing and it's really shifting the way that our society has gotten so used to living. So what got you into this?
Oh, yeah. So, I think from a very young age, I was lucky enough to live in a family that put a really high value on the environment. And I grew up super connected to the outdoors. So a lot of camping and hiking and on the outskirts of a very small town. So I just had, tons of space, just open acreage behind our house where I could go explore. And so kind of with that rooted in me, I had always really considered myself to be, a green person or an environmentalist, and have always been interested in topics like this. And then about four or 5 years ago, I realized that there were just so many places in my life where my actions just really weren't matching up with my values. And the trash that I was producing was definitely one of those areas. So I've been vegetarian and vegan for a long, long, long time and had kind of, almost stopped there and stopped with, riding my bike instead of driving to work as much as I could. And some other actions that I was really focused on, but realized that I had been ignoring just so many other places in my life where I might be able to be doing better. So I started, researching what in 2014, 2015 was really like a burgeoning, oh gosh, I don't want to say burgeoning movement. That's what I was about to say, but there was a burgeoning online presence, I will say, of a movement that has been in place and being used by many, many other societies and communities, particularly Indigenous communities and, people who have been economically disenfranchised, have been applying a lot of these principles for, thousands of years. And so when I kind of talk about my origins, I don't want to say, I'm wary of saying, I discovered something that was just beginning, because I think we get a little bit, the quote unquote zero waste movement can get a little bit lost and not appreciate kind of the roots of people who have been doing this work for much longer than us. But I found a lot of resources online and at that time for switching out a lot of habits that I had in my household to be a lot more thoughtful and consume a lot more mindfully and just waste a lot less. So that's kind of where I started in 2014, 2015. And then I spent several years really working to cut down on the trash coming out of my household and just rethink kind of the way that I was using things. And luckily at that point there was so much information to look at online and so many tools to help me do that.
That's great. So in your own life, in your personal life, so you were talking a little bit about in your home, how are you applying the zero waste concept? And if you could explain it almost like in the steps that you started with, so that someone that might be interested in beginning to become more zero waste or lower their waste, where was an easy place for you to start? And then how did you build on that?
For sure. So, I think the best place to start with zero waste, and a lot of people recommend this, is to really start by not trying to change anything, but just to notice. As we've talked about, there's a lot of overlap between zero waste and mindfulness and minimalism, in that a really good tool for beginning your work anywhere is not judging yourself. It's just noticing what's going on. And so my first step was just to take my trash can out from underneath my sink. And once I was able to start composting, I could keep my trash out. So I, wasn't worried about the smell of, food scraps or whatever. But so once I just had the other kinds of waste going into my trash can, I took it and I set it out on my kitchen counter. And then every time I put a piece of trash in there, I could look at the piece of trash and feel some ownership of it. And so if that was a plastic bag of, an empty plastic bag from the baby carrots that I bought in the produce section, it became really easy to notice, like, oh my God, I just bought carrots in a plastic bag, when at my grocery store, 2 feet to the left, there's a bin of carrots not in a plastic bag. And you might have to, wash them and cut them up yourself. But that is such a tiny step. And one that I was, totally willing and able to take on. So being able to notice your relationship to trash and, what kinds of things you're finding necessary in your life that might come wrapped in single-use plastic is a huge first step. And so for me, from there, it was a pretty natural progression to look at, like one area of my home, like my kitchen, and realize that, when I'm buying produce at the grocery store, I can easily take my own cloth bags and just completely eliminate the plastic bags that you might put apples in or potatoes in. And a huge part of my journey has been affected by the immense privilege that I have of living in a major US city with grocery stores. I have 4 grocery stores within, I don't know, a mile of me maybe. And several of them have incredible bulk options. So I don't have, I can buy flour in a cloth bag and not have to get it in a plastic bag or a paper bag. And because of that privilege, I was really able to eliminate most of the plastic from food that I need to buy, and then expand from there to looking at, in the bathroom, do I need 6 different kinds of plastic bottles of body soap and shampoo and conditioner and a hair mask and all of this other stuff, and look for different alternatives to that kind of thing. So the way I apply it is really looking at what's coming out of my trash can, and then what alternatives exist for me locally and are easy to access, and where you can kind of marry those two things is what you might consider like the best you can do.
That's amazing. So one thing that I found difficult when I started the zero waste journey was when I started to notice like there was so much I was throwing in the trash I had never even thought of before of what was going to happen to that piece of trash next.
Yes.
Like it wasn't a thought that crossed my mind until it did. And then once I saw that, I was like, oh my God, like I'm a terrible person. I'm throwing all this stuff away. I'm killing the environment. And it's not always easy to make those changes. So I had to deal with a phase where I was feeling guilty a lot of the time as I was slowly making these transitions. And then I would slip up. I would take my reusable bags most of the time. And then one time I would forget. And then I'd feel so guilty about having to use plastic bags. How did you navigate that phase?
Oh, wow. It's generous to call it a phase. Because to be honest with you, I am very much still navigating that. And that for me is really an ongoing process of recognizing and realizing that in the world we live in, there is just really no way to be a completely ethical consumer. It's not possible. And obviously, I think there's ways we can do better than we're doing, but it does take a lot of work to sit with the knowledge that whatever we're doing is never going to be quote unquote enough. In our individual actions and our individual choices, we're never going to be able to completely eliminate, landfills and all of the dangers and risks and destruction that comes from landfills being such a prominent part of our lives. We're never going to be able to conquer all of the different issues that there are with consuming resources in the society that we've gotten to. So a big part for me is trying to balance living as close to my values as I possibly can. And also just being able to be gentle with myself when I'm not able to do that. So I spent a lot of time being extremely rigid about my specifically my plastic consumption. And this seems like a good time to mention. Trash and plastic consumption are really like one part of a very complex picture and puzzle. And the zero waste mentality and movement is really about so much more than just what is going directly into your trash can, but it is a very natural and easy place to start thinking about it. So it's a nice place to hone in on, although of course it's not the be all and end all of what the problems we're facing environmentally are. But when I can release some of that rigidity and stop expecting myself to be perfect, I have a much healthier relationship to myself and the world, and I'm able to handle, buying. Now, one of the things I buy is tofu, even though it comes in the plastic. I've kind of allowed that back into my life, and maybe 90% of what I buy is plastic free. For my kitchen is plastic free. And then, 5 to 10%, I'm buying some certain things that are creating waste and trash and going into my trash can. So navigating kind of where you can be gentle and realize that not every single thing you do is going to be perfect, and just being able to kind of sit with that knowledge and face it is a huge part of this work. And it's not something that I feel like I'm 100% good at. But it's an ongoing process for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's something that will really help a lot of listeners as they're navigating this, because everyone that I've talked to has experienced the once you realize what you've been doing for years and you start thinking like, wow, how many of these plastic bags have I used in my whole life? And now they're sitting somewhere never to be decomposed, and I can't take that back. And you kind of get this crazy fear. So yeah, I think how you explained, just really bringing that mindful outlook to it of like non-judgment and knowing that you're doing the best that you can be really helpful. So thank you for that. Now, you've done something really amazing, which is start to bring the zero waste concept into your classroom. Can you explain what that looks like?
Yeah, it really looks similar to how it exists in my home, in that it's all kind of driven from more of a frame of mind and a relationship than it is with any specific actions or tips. Of course, there's lots of those, but after maybe 2 years of feeling like I was being pretty successful living zero waste in my own personal life, I felt like I was able to turn my focus to my classroom and realize, I've been able to change a lot of things at home and had amazing resources to figure out a lot of ways to do that for home, but I found almost nothing online to guide me to doing that in my classroom. So that was when I decided, like, all right, I'm just going to kind of start from scratch here and start documenting what I'm doing. And hopefully it can help some other people who are interested as well. So it started out the same way that I did at home. We did a waste audit in my classroom in 2017, I think. And again, I'm lucky enough that I have school-wide composting, so I don't have to navigate there being food in a trash can. And I can really, I can literally turn out a trash can onto the carpet and we can look through it. So I would say for anyone who's interested in doing that, if you are able to separate your food waste into any other receptacle, that's a great place to start, because then you can really start looking at what's coming out. And what was in my trash can was, every 3 days there would be a handful of tiny little glue sticks in there. There would be the extra plastic from me cutting out something that I had laminated. There would be a colossal amount of food wrappers and Ziploc bags and trash from our daily snack time. There would be a bunch of antibacterial wipes every a couple times a week when we would clean off our tables. And so then just piece by piece, just like I did at home, I started looking for other ways to apply the mentality that I have used at home to my classroom. So the next year I asked for washcloths on my school supply list instead of antibacterial wipes. And now we have like a bottle of all-purpose cleaner spray and a pile of washcloths that we wash the tables with, and then they go in a laundry basket, and either I or a parent volunteer washes those washcloths. And for the, when I was looking at how much plastic I was cutting off all of the little center materials and cards that I was laminating, I realized there has to be a way to make this resource durable and last, so my kids, can flip it over every day without it being coated in unrecyclable plastic and made to last literally forever. Like this little cute center activity that my kids are playing with now will still be on the planet when they have grandchildren or great grandchildren. And that's not the level of durability that I am actually needing. So I figured out that if you glue that to like thin cardboard boxes, like cereal boxes, which I asked my students to send in, using wet glue, I glue papers to that now and cut them out. And I started doing that in 2017. And this year I pulled out like a hundreds matching game that is still going strong. And sometimes they need a little bit of glue around the edges. So it takes a little bit more time and mindfulness that way in some ways. But it eliminated a huge part of what we were just burning through supply wise. So yeah, that's a little bit about how it looks in my classroom.
That's really helpful. That's such a good idea for when you were talking about laminating. I had no idea what you could have done to as an alternative. So that's a really great tip of just gluing to the cardboard boxes. So glue, you talked about there being like, glue sticks in the trash. Have you found a swap for that?
Yeah. The best swap that I found for that is just to use wet glue instead of glue sticks. Glue sticks are, less messy and easier, but even before I was thinking about zero waste at all and the amount of plastic to glue ratio in a glue stick, glue sticks drove me up the wall because, you glue something with them and then in 2 days it's fallen off. And it just seems like they are like the least effective thing that a lot of teachers are clinging on to. And it's now hard for me to understand why, because switching to wet glue was such an easy, quick swap. So I have 2 kinds of wet glue in my classroom. I just use the regular like glue bottles, and that we use if we're gluing like huge pieces of paper onto something. And then I also have these small containers that hold like just a regular dish sponge, and I pour glue on top of that. And there's 1,000 tutorials out there for creating these glue sponges. And then it eliminates the mess that can come from wet glue, unless you're, really on your kids about how much glue they're squeezing out of the bottle. And I will say my kids are 6 and 7. Some of them are 5 at the beginning of the year. And I would say probably 95% of them can handle squeezing out the right amount of glue from a glue bottle. And then of course there are those other friends who are gonna struggle a little bit and squeeze out a huge pile, but with a little bit of guidance, everyone can handle squeezing wet glue from a bottle. But then the glue sponges are really nice because there's almost no risk of that. They just take the paper and touch it to the sponge. And so if it's a little thing like something we're gluing in our journals or, smaller scraps of paper, the sponges are really easy to use. And then glue sticks aren't necessary, and whatever you have glued actually stays glued to the paper, which is super nice.
That's great. So do you go so far as to tackle the waste that's coming into your classroom from your students' lunches?
That's a great question. And the short answer is not really. Um, as I'm doing this, I have been also trying to be really aware and really careful of what can happen um, when we're pressuring families to do too much and asking them to come on board with something that they're not really ready for. And that is now the main component of trash coming out of my classroom is still snack trash. So, I've kind of explained to parents at back to school night and in my little like about our classroom, info brochure, that we're trying to be a zero waste classroom. And if you can, please send snacks in reusable containers or reusable bags, or just, fresh fruit like an apple or a banana or an orange, which has its own beautiful packaging that we can then compost. And a lot of them do. But there are definitely still families who are sending in, the applesauce pouches and granola bars and bags of chips. And I don't want any family to feel like they're being targeted for doing what's necessary. So, just like I'm buying tofu in a plastic container because I experimented with making tofu and it just was not sustainable for me. And that's something that I've like prioritized. I would love to have tofu in my life. Um, I don't want to put too much pressure on families and have there be any kind of shaming involved for kids who are bringing, snack that comes in some kind of trash. And with me not knowing, what their family situation is economically or time wise, I don't really speak directly to families about their lunch waste or their snack waste or their food waste. I do, as a class, we learn about, why we're trying to be a zero waste classroom and why some things in our classroom might look different than other places. And so I hope that they are able to kind of drive that with their own families when they're ready for it. But I personally don't want to, go directly to anyone about that.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So that kind of leads into what my next question was how do you educate your students? Like, what does that look like teaching grade 1 students what zero waste means and why it's important?
Yeah. This is such a good question. And I think it can look different for every single classroom, especially depending on, where you are. Kind of where your community is at, where your school is at, where the parents are at. Like I kind of mentioned at the beginning, at my school, I'm super lucky to have a huge amount of autonomy in the curriculum that I'm choosing or designing and, what I'm working on with my kids. So I start out every single year with a project-based learning unit that lasts about 5 or 6 weeks. And the question we start with is, why are we trying to have a zero waste classroom? And then over the course of 5 or 6 weeks for about 30 or 40 minutes a day or most days, we're exploring what does zero waste mean? Where are some of the places in our classroom that we're working to be zero waste? So, they're noticing we're not using those antibacterial wipes, we're using the washcloths. Or for tissues, I cut up a giant flannel sheet into squares and we're blowing our nose in these tissues and then putting them in a dirty laundry basket. And we're composting our banana peels. So through that unit, we're looking at some of the reasons why, and always trying to balance that with kind of an age appropriate for 5 or 6 year old lens at that time. So this is a topic that can get super dark, super quick if you let it. I think a lot of us are aware right now, especially as the climate strikes have gained more and more momentum, and we're now hearing the words climate emergency and climate crisis favored way more over climate change. And just kind of as a society, we have a shifting awareness and involvement and knowledge of like we're really facing some dark things ahead, and there it can be difficult to navigate how to get kids engaged with this subject without overwhelming them or causing them anxiety, which is definitely something that we don't want to be doing, especially for these super young kids. However, as every parent and teacher, anyone who's around kids knows, they are at a prime age for being super engaged with fairness and justice. And especially, so I teach first grade, so right around that age, I find they are really, really excited and engaged when you are able to treat them, when you're able to show some trust in them and treat them like they're a little more grown up. So, we have some kind of frank conversations like, when we're talking about plastic going into the ocean and, a sea turtle eating a plastic bag, that can make us feel sad. And then, we're going out and we're seeing plastic bags at the grocery store and maybe even in our own parents' carts. So naming that with some honesty and being able to balance like, ooh, here's a great opportunity for us to say like, ooh, can we bring in our own bag? But without assigning guilt or blame, is a really important part of any kind of conversations that we're having with kids at this age.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So you do this kind of like a whole unit. Do you tie this into your regular teaching curriculum? So like this isn't just an extra thing. It's something that you're integrating into your language studies or into things like that. Is that what you're doing with it?
Yeah. So kind of the template, I was able to take a workshop on project-based learning through my district. It was like a year-long professional development class that they offered. And through that, we looked at how to make a project-based learning unit be really multidisciplinary. So a huge component of us looking at the trash that's coming out is data and measurement, and that standard where we're working on separating the trash into categories and then comparing the different amounts, noticing like, oh, when we go on a litter pickup of our playground, we are seeing, several times the amount of plastic and food wrappers than we are like glass and metal. That's just, not a thing that we're seeing outside on our, within our scope of control. So there are huge opportunities for math integration, especially at the time that you might be doing a waste audit and counting up different amounts of trash. And as you get into upper grades, you could even, look at things like weighing the trash and exploring like density and mass and, is a giant plastic container more or less trash than several different plastic bags because it's, one versus 4 or 5, but it's heavier. And there are so many rich opportunities for science and math in that realm. And then the like literacy and comprehension can come in a big way as we're reading. There's some really great literature coming out now about endangered animals and conservation work and a lot of different books are being written on topics like this, and it's super easy to pull in any kind of literacy activity that you would do with a normal, quote unquote normal, with another read aloud as part of your just regular curriculum, but just have it apply to this topic.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. So as we're wrapping up here, is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience that's just kind of on your heart right now?
That's such a good question. I feel like we've already touched on kind of a lot of the things that tend to come up for me when I talk about that. This big, big battle that we're really facing, and I think the main things that I try and hold in my mind are, like we were talking about before, that we being people who are like me, who are getting a lot of publicity and recognition as the quote unquote zero waste movement really grows and gains more traction. We being, middle class, primarily white women, are not by any means the founders of this movement. And we need to be doing a much better job at being really intersectional as we're doing this work. And that means lots and lots of things. Recognizing that we are not the people who are going to be affected the most by the climate crisis. We're not the people affected the most by plastic pollution and all of the health risks that come along with environmental racism. And so I think what needs to be said in any conversation that we're having about sustainability and environmentalism and, eco-friendly or green work is that we need to be doing a better job at acknowledging the people who have done this work for a long time without any of the recognition, who have, a lot to teach us about our relationship to the world. And that needs to be much more a component of what we're talking about than it is right now. And then the second thing I would say is just to revisit that concept of gentleness. And I think I'm saying this because it's something that, as I said before, I struggle with a lot, and I know other people struggle with, as you shared. It's hard. It's hard to look at where we've gotten to and, recognize your part in it, although small. And, you and I personally didn't invent this system that has become so destructive, but we're complicit in it to a huge degree. And that's difficult to face, for sure. So looking for ways to be kind to yourself and gentle with yourself and acknowledge where you can do better, but also where you're doing the very best that you can is, I think, really necessary to being able to do this work in any kind of sustained way, which is what we need.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen the quote pop up on Instagram so many times.
Yes.
It doesn't take each person doing it perfectly. It takes a lot of people doing it imperfectly. So I think that's
absolutely
a really great thing to consider, as this was a big topic, a lot for teachers to think about with zero waste in their own lives, and then how can we apply this in the classroom. So you gave us some really great takeaways. Thank you so much for that. I think we're all going to be ready to take baby steps, one step at a time, to make small changes that eventually will add up to big changes as we're doing it together. So thank you so much. Where can our audience connect with you?
I would say my primary method of sharing things is Instagram. And that's Instagram. I'm just at Zero Waste Classroom. I also have a blog, which is zerowasteclassroom.org, and a Facebook, which is just Zero Waste Classroom. But the Instagram, I'm much better at maintaining and updating than the other two. But hopefully those are a work in progress, and I'm working on, making it accessible kind of no matter where people like to live online.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heidi, for spending the time with us today.
Yeah, thank you for your great, thoughtful questions.
All right. So to get more information about this episode and to get links to Heidi's Instagram and her website, go to educalm.com/TBE, as in the Balanced Educator 122. Again, that's educalm, EDUCALME.com/TBE 122. Thank you so much for spending your time with us here today. We hope that you learned something that you can take into your life and take into your classroom. If you got value from this episode, please share it from someone that you think would enjoy it as well. Have a wonderful week.